Hi, this is Eric from Longbox Review at longboxreview.wordpress.com. Today I'm going to talk about a bunch of comics that I've been wanting to talk about for quite a while. I've been waiting for the best time to do so because I was waiting for the ending of a particular comic before I got into discussing these titles. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about some TV to comics. So this is my must-read TV, and if you don't know what that is a reference to, NBC did a must-see TV tagline, I think back in the 90s. I can't remember when exactly, but it was to promote all of the shows that were very popular at the time. So, like Friends and ER and some other shows on there. Anyway, so that's my riff on that. And so I just wanted to let you know as well that I will be talking about specific things about these comics if you haven't read them. And today I'll discuss Battlestar Galactica, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Angel and Faith, Star Trek, and a few different Doctor Who comics. And don't be surprised if I slip into discussing the respective television series and or movies related to that. So first up is, I'm going to sort of do this chronologically in a weird way. We'll see how that goes. Anyway, first up is Battlestar Galactica. This is from Dynamite. This was written by Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning and illustrated by Caesar Razik, with colors by Venetius Townsend, letter by Simon Bowland, and covers by Chris Eliopoulos and Alex Ross. So, first of all, while Star Trek was my very first, I guess, fan favorite TV show, my sci-fi fandom started there. I came into it obviously late. I wasn't there for the debut of Star Trek in 1966. I caught it in the late 70s in reruns, or mid to late 70s. But Battlestar Galactica in 1978 was the first sci-fi show that I got into from the ground up. And I absolutely loved that show. Apollo and Starbuck and the Vipers battling the Cylons, and I just loved it. The Galactica itself, I just love the ships. I'm a really big ships guy when it comes to sci-fi, which is why one of the reasons why I love Star Trek. I love the ships in that show. And Battlestar Galactica was very similar. Now, the show only lasted one season, essentially, and then came back the following year with Galactica 1980, and I won't go into that travesty too much. There's some tie-ins in this Battlestar Galactica comic to tie the old 1978 series to the 1980 series, but I'll get to that in a minute. But I wanted to pick up Battlestar Galactica from Dynamite because it was, a Battlestar Galactica comic. Now, Marvel did Battlestar Galactica, I think, around the same time that the show was on the air. And I picked up a few issues of those, but never really got the whole series, and it wasn't all that great from what I remember. And there may have been a few other times where some comic publishers may have picked up this property. I don't recall right now, and I should have looked, but I didn't. Anyway, but Dynamite announced this several months ago, and I thought, well, it's got Abnett and Lanning on it, and it's one of my favorite sci-fi properties, so I'm going to pick this up, or at least check it out. And so I did. I got the first 5 issues. Now, you may be asking, Eric, why only 5 issues if you love this property so much? Well, here's why. So the opening storyline to this launch of Battlestar Galactica comics has to do with a bunch of timey-wimey stuff, if you'll pardon the expression. There is a time weapon that Dr. Z comes up with that Starbuck and Apollo uses that basically changes everything that we know as the status quo of Battlestar Galactica and puts these two main characters into basically an altered timeline situation. Now, that would be an interesting storyline in general, but I did not like... I guess I just didn't like starting off the story that way. I kind of wanted to be reintroduced to these characters and the situation they were in post the 1978 show, or 79. Wow, I think I said 78, and I think it was 1979. Anyway. Nope, I was right. It was 78. Wow. It's funny what the memory will do with you when you're trying to record and talk about something intelligently. Anyway, so I just wanted, I guess, more of a setup to these characters and what happened between the series and the start of the comic. Now, obviously, this is before they reach Earth in Galactica in 1980, or maybe that's not even going to be considered part of this story. But there are elements, like I mentioned before, there are elements of Galactica 1980. Adama has his beard and mustache. There's, I mentioned Dr. Z. There's the kid genius prophet, whatever the hell that kid was, who was in 1980. He's in this. So it's kind of a bridge, I guess, between the two series, I suppose. I won't know because I dropped it, like I said, after 5 issues at the end of this altered timeline story. But I did enjoy it in general. It was interesting to see how Starbuck and Apollo, especially Starbuck, dealt with the altered timeline versions of these characters that we are familiar with. And Starbuck actually gets to see himself as a fat, apathetic almost character, considering what's going on, although that turns around in the end. But there were lovely covers by Alex Ross. That was one thing that I really enjoyed, and what kind of drew me to the title was to see Alex Ross portray these characters, and he does so very well. There was an issue number 6 that I kind of wish I had picked up. I had pre-ordered, but I didn't. Maybe I should try and find it in the back issue bins. But it was supposed to focus on basically the crew of the Galactica and what goes on during a typical day there. And I kind of like those stories. And I'll touch on a similar story when I get to talking about the Star Trek series. Anyway, if you are getting Battlestar Galactica and you continued on with it further than I did, please let me know if you think it was, or just let me know what you think of it, and if you believe that it is something that I missed out on, let me know, and I will maybe pick up the trades or find these in the back issues. Oh, and I just wanted to note, too, speaking of Battlestar Galactica, the TV series, the 2004, I think it was, the reimagined version of Battlestar Galactica, that, what's his name, Moore? I want to say Moore. I don't remember his first name. Anyway, he used to work on Star Trek Next Generation. That series was awesome. The first 3 seasons, the miniseries that preceded the series, and then the first 3 seasons were spectacular. And then it kind of fell apart in the 4th season. But anyway, I love that. So it'd be interesting to see if IDW does. I keep saying IDW, Dynamite or IDW. I don't know. If Dynamite takes the 2004 series and how everything was reimagined and does a comic based on that. And again, maybe there was already a comic. I don't know. Anyway, I'm moving on to one of my all-time favorite TV shows, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Now, this is Buffy the Vampire Slayer Season 9 from Dark Horse. And this is by, many different writers, but it started off with Joss Whedon. With the constant of George Genty, and I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that name correctly, on the art. Where I absolutely loved the television series, I have not been a particular fan of the comic book seasons that they've done. So they've done 2. They just announced recently Season 10 with Rebecca Isaacs, who did the art on Angel and Faith, coming on to do Buffy Season 10, which is great because I've never been a big fan of Genty's art, and he's done the last 2 seasons. That's about 65-ish issues of Buffy that I've seen him on, although he's moving over to the Serenity limited series, so I won't get away from him all that much. But I did like Rebecca Isaacs' work on Angel and Faith. But anyway, like I said, I wasn't a big fan of the Buffy comics. Season 8 was sort of a meandering mess. And Joss Whedon even said in the final issue of that comic that he goofed. He fell into the trap of, I can do anything in a comic book, so I'm just going to throw all this stuff at you. And so he publicly apologized about that, and also he said that in season 9 that things would be different. And they were. This series lasted 25 issues with a few tie-in miniseries. There was a Spike series. There was a Willow series called Wonderland that actually really tied into the events of the last arc of the comic. So I'm not sure why they just didn't include that in there, other than the focus was exclusively on Willow and not the other characters from the show. But what I remember from season 9 was, there's a focus back on Buffy being a slayer and going after vampires, and then there's these zombie vampires that they introduce that Buffy has to fight against. And then there is a slayer whose name I can't remember, who basically turns against Buffy, and if I remember again correctly, it's been a while since I've read these, turns into a zombie herself. And Buffy and her fight, but I think in the end they reconcile, or maybe she even sacrifices herself, which is a Whedon trope in his stories. Anyway, the end of the series I thought was a nice way to end it, because at the end of season 8, because of the Twilight event, I'll just call it that, Buffy and Angel essentially take away magic from their world. And any creature left behind on Earth at that time was still there, but all the hellmouths and all the portals to other dimensions were basically shut down, and magic was going away, and it was starting to affect the real, quote unquote, real world. And when Willow realized this, that's when she went off on her quest to restore magic to the world, which they end up doing. So that does intrigue me as far as what's going to happen in season 10, and I have already pre-ordered issue 1 of season 10. I'll be getting it. I do like the fact that, at least with season 9, they're doing shorter runs, so about 2 years-ish of comics, and I think that's a pretty good number for, if you're going to do a season, if you will, of comics. And considering how Marvel's doing some of their relaunches at number 1 every so often, maybe this is the trend. Maybe this is the way to do it, where you start over at number 1 every year or two to get people interested, and because number 1 sell. So I guess I'm okay if you're going to actually do seasons or a particular storyline, kind of like what they did with Young Avengers, with what's his name, McKelvey and Kieran Gillen, I believe, where they had just one long story that they told, I think, in 15 issues. So I guess in general, I'm okay with it. We'll see how that goes. Next is Angel and Faith, which also came to Dark Horse at the same time that Buffy Season 9 was going on. I don't know if this is supposed to be, what season this is supposed to be of Angel, if you continue with the whole season concept. I thought I read that the next Angel and Faith series, starting in 2014, was going to... I thought I read that there was going to be season 10 along with Buffy, or maybe I'm just confusing the two in my mind. Anyway, I know that Angel had a series at IDW, which is probably why I keep saying IDW when I was discussing Battlestar Galactica. But anyway, Joss brought Angel to Dark Horse because he wanted everything under one roof. So Dark Horse now does Buffy, Angel, and the Serenity Firefly stuff. Anyway, Angel and Faith is written by Krista Gage with Rebecca Isaacs on art throughout the entire 25-issue run, which was awesome to have, I believe anyway, to have a consistent creative team there. Now, where I wasn't all that impressed with Buffy Season 9, I really, really enjoyed this Angel and Faith series because it had a very strong storyline. throughout the entire run. Basically, it was Angel trying to resurrect Giles throughout the entire thing. And of course, he does succeed, but in the end, Giles comes back as a young boy, a teenage boy, instead of his haughty, older British self, which was amusing as well. But it was the interaction between Angel and Faith that was really, really good, because Faith would alternate, and I think realistically, from a character standpoint, between wanting to help Angel out and then realizing that Angel might be just a little crazy or maybe crossing a line, and if he does, then she was going to take him out. And that happened a few times until they were both on the same page. But I really enjoyed it. Like I said, it was a really strong, cohesive run of a story. So I'm looking forward to the next series, whatever they're going to call that, of Angel and Faith. Oh, and just to add, it's funny that I liked Angel and Faith a little bit better than Buffy season 9, because there was a time during the Angel television series, I think it was around season 4, that I liked that show even better than Buffy. I know a lot of people don't like season 4 of Angel, but I did. I thought I was on the edge of my seat on many of those episodes. So there you go. Okay, next up, Star Trek. This is from IDW. There's IDW. This was the series that they launched after the 2009 Star Trek movie with J.J. Abrams, and this is by writer Mike Johnson and a bunch of different artists. But it started off with Stephen Molnar, and let's see. Currently, and it's at issue 28 at the time of this recording, art by Irfan Fajar, and I'll get to that in a minute. But the story consultant listed on all these issues is Roberto Orsi, who co-wrote both of the Star Trek films with Abrams, or that Abrams directed. So it's very consistent. Well, I find it very consistent with the events and the characters that we've seen in the 2000 movie and the most recent Star Trek Into Darkness. And so when I saw this announced, I thought, oh, well, that'll be amusing, especially because they described it as the classic Star Trek stories as told within the new Star Trek universe that we got with the movies. I thought, oh, that'll be amusing. I'll get that for 6 issues and see how it goes. And here we are at issue 28, the last one I read, and it's still going strong, and I really, really like it. Let's see. So they started off with doing basically 2 issues to adapt the classic episodes. And the first one was a adaptation of Where No Man Has Gone Before with Gary Mitchell with the silvery eye thing. So that was interesting. And then they did Galileo 7, and that's when I realized, oh, wait a minute, they're not just retelling these old stories with slightly different things because of the new universe, the new timeline. They're actually telling the stories better in some ways. So in Galileo 7, some things happen in the original series which seemed kind of dumb, but given that it was that time period and the budgets were low, I always forgive the original Star Trek for that. But they changed some plot elements in this comic adaptation of the story that I thought made total sense and just made for a stronger story. They also did Operation Annihilate. They did a mirror riff, and that one was where they started to deviate even more so from just retelling the story, but they would grow the situation, grow the story into something different. And then they also did a story kind of following up on the events of the movie. So Vulcan gets destroyed in Star Trek, and then there's a storyline in the comic involving some Vulcans who basically are going after the Romulans for doing, basically trying to get vengeance for what the Romulans have done. So I thought that was really cool. And also they did a Tribbles story, which wasn't just the trouble with Tribbles. It was or showing us kind of the origin, if you will, I guess, in a way, of Tribbles, but just involving the Tribbles in the story in a different way. So I really like that. And then let's see here. There was a particular issue. Oh, number 13. So I mentioned under BSG there was a number 6 was supposed to be like a day in the life of a crew member. Well, Star Trek did that in issue number 13. This is by Mike Johnson again and Stephen Molnar. And this issue focused on the security guy from the movie that Kirk called Cupcake a couple times. I believe his name is Hefner in the comic. I don't know if he was named in the movie, but no, Hendorf. His name is Hendorf. Anyway, so it follows. So he's doing. There's the typical trope of well, I was going to say TV and movies, but I've seen it a lot on TV, but I see it a lot in fiction too, comics as well, where one of the characters writes home and lets people whom they care about know how their day is going or how their job is going, and then they proceed to tell a bunch of events, and that's exactly what this does, this story. So it gives several adventures that Hendorf has been exposed to while on the Enterprise with Kirk and Spock and company. And it was a fantastic issue. Probably the best Star Trek comic I have ever read. And one of the best Star Trek stories I have ever witnessed, if you will. And I even told Mike Johnson that. I went on Twitter and said, hey, this is great. Thank you for that. So if nothing else, you should try and find that issue and read it and let me know what you think about it. I thought it was fantastic. Let's see. The Star Trek comic has followed up on the events of, well, it did a prelude to Into Darkness with, I think, a 4-issue run called Countdown. 4 or 5, I can't remember now. Anyway, there was a Countdown to Darkness. That was a separate miniseries. And then they did a follow-up to the film called After Darkness, I believe. Right now, and we still, like I said, I'm up to issue 28, and it just ended what's called the Kittimer conflict, part 4 of 4. But that also has ties to the movie, Into Darkness anyway, because Section 31 features prominently in this. And then coming up is a gender swap issue where the men are females in the story and the females are men in the story. So I'm looking forward to reading that. Like I said, I've really enjoyed this comic, with one exception. Here lately, the art, I don't like the art. For one thing, the dialogue boxes, the lettering is so large. It's like they blew up the pages when they went to print. I just didn't like it. I don't know. For some reason, it just bugs me, even though it's much easier to read on these old eyes. But what I don't like, and I don't know if this is the artist, I assume it has to be the artist, but a lot of the faces in here look to be really Photoshopped. Like they took a photo reference and tweaked it to make it look, like comic book art. And so a lot of the faces, if you're looking at them, I mean, it looks like the actors who portray the character. And it looks weird. It looks plastic. And then when there isn't an actor, a character that was not an actor in the show or in the movies, then it's very clearly comic book art. So I don't like that. When I was younger, and there were licensed comics out there, that's one of the things that used to bug me, was that the characters didn't always look like the actors. Well, apparently I've changed my mind on that, and I actually prefer that they, there's some resemblance. I wouldn't mind that, but if they look too much like it, like this, like here recently in the comic, I don't know. It just throws me out of the story. It makes me think, oh, I'm reading a comic, which is weird because I know I'm reading a comic. I'm having a hard time explaining this. It just doesn't feel natural, which is counterintuitive, I think. But I don't know. I just don't care for it. I hope that they stop doing that and move on to something else, or at least move on from that artist. Anyway, I'll be sticking around with it, though, for the foreseeable future. Okay, so I'm going to end with a discussion about some Doctor Who stuff, and I will be talking about the TV series and some of the specials here recently as well. So I just read the Doctor Who special written by Paul Cornell. And this is by IDW. So IDW got the license to do Doctor Who comics several years ago. I think they said it was 6 years that they got to do this. And this was the ending to it. So they BBC took back the license, I guess. Somebody else is going to do it. So I just want to mention that. I'll come back to this. But this is the end of IDW's relationship with Doctor Who. But I did start my relationship with IDW's Doctor Who and there've been a few comic runs of Doctor Who with IDW, and one of the latest ones was the one written by Andy Diggle and art by Mark Buckingham. This was featuring Matt Smith's Doctor and started out with Amy and Rory, the Pawns. And I got the first 6 issues, and then I dropped it. But there were 2-issue stories each, kind of like how Star Trek started out. And I really enjoyed it. Diggle really seemed to capture the voices of the characters, which is really important, especially in regards to the Doctor. You know, Matt Smith's portrayal of the Doctor. So they did a really good job there. But like I said, it was okay. I enjoyed it well enough. It was just something that I wanted to try out. I didn't think that I would continue on with it going into it. But plus I was looking for comics to cut at the time. I'm always looking for comics to cut for my pull list because it's way too long. So in other words, it was good enough for what it was. And then they started doing the Prisoners of Time limited series. It was a 12-issue special leading up to the 50th anniversary of the Doctor. So I wanted to get that, where every Doctor was featured in an issue. So the first issue was the first Doctor, William Hartnell. The second was Patrick Troughton, on down through the Doctors, including Matt Smith. And then we get the 12th issue, which is the resolution of the story. So this is written by Scott and David Tipton all the way through, and then there's different artists, I believe, per issue. And the story involved, there was an adventure with the Doctor and his companions, but at the end of every issue, or at some point during the issue, the companions would be kidnapped. And that goes on for the entire run of the Doctors. And then we get to issue 9 with Eccleston's Doctor, and then you find out who is behind these kidnappings. And it's the character on the show, Adam, who got this data port in his head. I can't remember the name of the episode. Satellite 1, I think. They referenced Satellite 1. I don't know if that was the name of the episode, but anyway, because he did this, Eccleston's Doctor basically threw him off the TARDIS and left him there. Well, of course, Adam didn't like that. He grew old and bitter and basically wanted revenge, and it turns out in the end that you find out that the Master is involved, and he's been the one kind of behind this whole thing. And the Doctors are all brought together, and it's part of the Master's plan, his master plan, to bring all the TARDISes together and then, I think, destroy them, and that would cause a ripple through the time vortex and destroy everything, blah, blah, blah. Of course, the Doctors and his companions all band together and defeat the Master and Adam. Well, Adam actually, once Adam realized what the Master was up to, he traded sides and ended up dying a hero, which that was a nice touch. But it was really cool to see in the end, at the end of the series, to see all the Doctors and all the companions together. At one point, I think it was Matt Smith's Doctor, when all the companions are kind of running towards the Doctors to help them, he's like, "Look at them." It was a cool moment. Let's see. And number 12 was drawn by Kelly Yates, and you get on page 2 and 3, you get a 2-page spread of all the doctors standing there together, which was really cool. Anyway, I really enjoyed that. It was kind of neat because at the time I was reading that, I don't remember what issue it was that I had read when I started watching the specials leading up to the 50th anniversary, which was, what was it called? The Doctors Revisited. And so that was a special on BBC America, a bunch of specials showcasing and spotlighting every doctor that we've seen so far. And then they would follow up after a bunch of discussion about those doctors. They would follow up with classic episodes, and I watched all those. And the thing about Doctor Who, the show, for me, is that it was the 4th Doctor, Tom Baker, that I was most familiar with because I had seen him on some PBS airings of these episodes. And this was, back in the late 80s, early 90s that I watched some of these. And I have to admit, I didn't think that Doctor Who was all that great back then. It was cheesy. It was just cheesy. But I was still interested. I knew the significance of Doctor Who, and I like sci-fi and fantasy and time stories relating to time travel. I love that stuff. So this theoretically, this is a show right up my alley, but for some reason it just didn't do it for me. But then I remember when the Fox Network announced that they were doing a TV movie. And this is the Paul McGann Doctor, and I was going to watch that, and that may turn into a Doctor Who series, co-done by BBC and Fox. That never materialized, and if you've ever watched the Doctor Who movie, you know why. It was not particularly good, although I did enjoy Paul McGann's performance. I actually did not see the initial broadcast of that movie when it first aired on Fox, but I watched it years later, and it was okay, like I said. But then when around, in 2005, when they brought Eccleston in as the Doctor and they relaunched Doctor Who, and this was on Sci-Fi, the Sci-Fi channel where I first saw this. So I knew it was coming, and I made it a point to watch it and instantly fell in love, especially with Eccleston's portrayal of the Doctor. He had the leather jacket, and he was kind of rough and tumble, in your face kind of a doctor. He wasn't the Tom Baker type doctor that I remember. He definitely wasn't Paul McGann. So I loved it, and I watched that first season, and then he regenerated into David Tennant. I'm like, oh, what? I loved Eccleston. Why can't they keep him? Of course, I didn't know all the behind the scenes stuff. They knew before the initial run of that first series in 2005 that Eccleston was gone and Tennant came in, or was going to come in and do that. Anyway, I fell in love with David Tennant after that, and I think that's I think he's an excellent actor. He brought a depth and gravity to the character and his portrayal. And I loved all the companions, starting with Rose, with Eccleston, and continuing on with Tennant. I liked Martha Smith. I loved, Martha Jones. I loved, what's her name? I loved Donna. Donna, I think, is the best companion up until Amy Pond. But she was definitely my favorite companion on the Tennant run. And then they brought in Matt Smith, and I did the same damn thing. I'm like, oh, I don't want to see Tennant go. Who's this guy Smith coming in and his fish custard or fish fingers and custard and his wackiness, and I ended up falling in love with this guy too. And of course, having Karen Gillan come in to play a Scottish companion, red-haired companion, was brilliant on the producer's part in my eyes. I loved her. She was fantastic. I know a lot of people didn't like her for some reason. You're crazy. Anyway, and now continuing on with Jenna Coleman's companion. And now we have a new doctor, Peter Capaldi, that shows up. So I just loved all that stuff. So anyway, back to Doctors Revisited. So like I said, I was reading Prisoners of Time, and it was nice to have been watching the Doctors Revisited because it gave me a sense of each doctor, the character of each doctor. And so when I was reading the comic, I think I read maybe issue 2, and up to that point I had already watched most of the Doctor Revisited specials. And so continuing on with the third through, Eccleston's doctors, or the doctor, I got a sense of all the doctors and how they were portrayed and what they were about. And I have to say, just as a side note, aside from the modern incarnation of doctors, and I'm talking about Eccleston on, I have to say that I like Patrick Troughton's doctor the best out of all the old doctors. He was spunky and a bit quirky, but I don't know. I just really enjoyed him much better than even Tom Baker. And then you get, like I said, that ended with all the doctors, the Prisoners in Time ended with all the doctors together, saving the universe once again. And then you have the Day of the Doctor special and the Time of the Doctor Christmas special that just aired, which was Matt Smith's last episode. And the Day of the Doctor for the 50th anniversary special, that was awesome to see Smith and Tennant come together and have that little adventure. I liked it much better than the Time of the Doctor. There's something about that last Christmas special that just kind of bugged me. I think mostly it was just the storytelling technique of telling, not showing, because they had to cover a lot of time in the show. A lot of time passes to where the Doctor grows literally old in it. And I just don't care for that kind of storytelling. And there was a lot of going back and forth between Jenna Coleman's companion story and the involvement of the Doctor in the town called Christmas. Anyway, it seemed kind of disjointed a bit, I guess. But I did rewatch it and enjoyed it better that time. And I am looking forward to Peter Capaldi coming on and seeing what happens there. So that ended Matt Smith's run, but not really, because you get like I said before at the beginning of this conversation, the Doctor Who special by Paul Cornell and drawn by Jimmy Broxton. And this is kind of it was $8, so it was a sort of an annual type thing, a bunch of pages. I don't know how many. Anyway, it was a nice cap, I think, to Matt Smith's run on the show, because it has his Doctor essentially traveling to our world, the real world, quote unquote real world, where he meets himself as Matt Smith. But he also is, he is the Doctor here, and so there's a Cyberman that got pulled through the time vortex into this alternate dimension where all of the Doctor's adventures are the shows here and on that world, or in this world, or whatever you want to call it. Anyway, it was amusing to see Matt Smith's Doctor react to Matt Smith's portrayal of, and all the other actors as well, because there were him and this one character in the book. I think her name is Allie. She's a 12-year-old girl who's a fan of Doctor Who, especially of Matt Smith. So they have an adventure together and save the world because the Cyberman is going to delete everything on our world. And so they take care of that. And along the way, you get to see Matt Smith's Doctor reacting to all this stuff that he sees as broadcasts of his lives on the show. And I thought that was really well done. Paul Cornell did a really good job capturing the voice of Matt Smith and just the whole Doctor Who vibe. So it was a nice capper to Matt Smith's run. And there you go. That's all of the must-read TV that I have for you today. Let me know what you think of this episode and of any particular comic if you happen to be reading them. And you can do so by leaving email at longboxreview@gmail.com. There's also the voicemail number at 208-953-1841. The Longbox Review Podcast is a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. If you are looking for a bunch of different kinds of comics podcasts, say that 5 times fast, go to comicspodcasts.com to find all those fine shows. And you can also find Longbox Review on Stitcher. Thanks for listening, everybody.